Hi everyone, welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is j.r.r or Jay or Jamie, depending on how you would like to call me. And this week I thought I would do a video kind of about my process that I take when I am writing and just kind of what I do when I am sitting down to do that. Please ignore Oliver in the background. He's playing with an IKEA bag right now, if you can hear that. But anyway, I just thought I would kind of do a video because I did, for the first time in a few weeks, get kind of bit with that creative bug, and I've been very excited to actually be writing again. And I talked a little bit about this. If you follow me on Twitter, I'll link my Twitter down below. Also, I kind of went on a rant about it the other day. But basically, I have been stuck for a very long time and haven't been writing, and it's been like months since I've produced any like hardcore content, I guess. So I'm very excited to get back into that, so I just thought I would kind of take you along with me on my kind of writing journey. So let's hop to. Okay, so I guess now that we have seen sort of the physical process of what I do to kind of get ready to like sit down and like prepare to write, I guess I'll talk a little bit about sort of my mental process that I go through when I'm writing. So basically I have been a storyteller for as long as I can remember, and I have been writing really most of my life. And I think I've talked a little bit about this before. I don't think ever on camera, but I definitely remember talking about this in a couple of my creative writing classes when that I took in college. And also, just for some background, I was an English major in college, so I double majored in English and political science, and I minored in cinema and media studies. So it was a very kind of narrative-based curriculum that I built for myself, and actually so I went to, I attended Simmons College here in Boston for 4 years, and kind of how their English program works is that there are 2 tracks that you can choose. So everybody has to take these 2 core courses, basically. One is like an intro to kind of just literature and like a basic sort of English class, if you will, that you might see in like high school, where we just read all sorts of stuff, from short stories to poetry to novels to just anything that Pei wanted us to read. Larry Pei is one of my all-time favorite humans on this planet. He is phenomenal. Go check him out. If you've never heard of him before, he's an author, he's a professor, he's an artist. He's just so cool. And I love him so much, and I owe a lot of my kind of development as a writer to him. And then the second class you take is an intro to theory class, and you really kind of just apply theory to what you're reading. And it was okay, honestly, but not one of my favorite classes that I took there. Also, I just didn't particularly care for the professor that taught it, so I feel like that definitely had an impact on my perception of the class. But anyway, so you take those 2 core classes, and then there's like probably another like 5 or 6 sort of required, not necessarily, it's sort of hard to explain unless like you are actually in the program. But basically it's a like required like time period of literature, so you have to take a class in like literature before 1600. So you could take, there was kind of like Renaissance literature, there was Shakespeare class, which is what I took and loved. There was a Greek mythology class that you could take. So you kind of do have options within those, so it's like you have to take like again, literature before 1600, you have to take like an American literature class, you have to take like a British literature before the 20th century, I think, and then you have to take like a 20th century either literature or media class, and some other, the requirements are online, I'll link it below anyway. But basically what I'm trying to get at, and this is very long-winded, I didn't really intend for this to be an explanation of my major, but anyway, here we are, kids. So anyway, there's kind of 2, once you get all those requirements out of the way, there's kind of 2 branches that you can take. You can either take literature or creative writing, and that just means you have to take a couple of extra electives, either a few extra literature classes or you take some creative writing classes. And I was the type of student that had to constantly be overachieving because that's just the environment that I grew up with. My high school was like that. I went to a incredibly small school out in Western Massachusetts. My graduating class size was about 49 kids, and we were a public school. And it was the type of high school, and I think I've talked about this in a previous video, if you sat through my last Cooking with j.r.r. video, I did talk about this a bit, but basically everybody did everything. It was super competitive. You had to do well academically, you had to do a million extracurriculars, you had to do sports, like, and like none of it was a requirement, but like you were kind of like the weird outcast kid if you didn't do it. So anyway, that's kind of just the environment I came from, and then that absolutely carried over to my college career. So I was constantly taking more classes than I needed to, and I ended up with so many kind of just extra credits and extra electives by the time I graduated, so that I had actually technically fulfilled the requirements of the literature track and the creative writing track. And I was the first student to ever do this in the history of the English department, as the tracks currently stand anyway. So everybody else kind of has either, you know, English literature or English writing on their degree, and mine just says English. So anyway, that's a fun little story for y'all, but I took, because I have been writing for a very long time, as I knew that in college I did want to focus a lot on creative writing, so I took a creative writing nonfiction, a creative writing fiction, and then a creative writing advanced fiction, which was an invite only class, and there were, I think, about 10 of us in there. And we had to push really hard to get the class kind of approved through the school because it had never been run before, and it was like a 3-hour class in the middle of the afternoon once a week, and it was just like, sometimes it was just such a slog to get through, but I had so much fun, and we all got to kind of do our own projects that we wanted to, write the stuff we wanted to. And what was really great was our professor, again, it was a Larry Pay taught class, and he encouraged us, if we already had stuff started, to kind of bring that into the class and workshop it and continue to work on it, or if you wanted to start something new, you could. And actually it worked out very well for me in particular, that I was, I'm a big fantasy writer. That is kind of my preferred genre to write, and I was starting a fantasy novel basically from scratch, and then my friend Maddie was also working on a fantasy novel. Hers was definitely like a YA novel. Mine could have been either way. I think I hadn't really made a decision at that point. I still haven't made a decision. Also, I haven't finished it by any means. But she brought a novel that she'd been working on for years. So this thing had like meat to it. It was already like 80 pages of text. But so anyway, it was a great way to kind of work on my individual pieces. And I've written kind of here and there for the novel that I started in that class, but it hasn't really moved much in the past few years, honestly. So it is something that it's a really good story, and I think I would like to work on it seriously again sometime. Maybe this winter, maybe not. I don't know. But what I am working on right now, and what has kind of been my primary focus ever since last winter, when again I was kind of off for 3 months on what Sean and I call our sabbaticals, is fanfiction. And I have been writing fanfiction since I was very young. So fanfiction has pretty much always existed as long as literature has existed. It's just gone through different forms. And I remember being probably 8 or 9 years old when I first started to think of the concept of fanfiction. I didn't know what it was, you know, because I'm an 8-year-old. I shouldn't have been in that sphere of the internet at that point, and I wasn't, so that's, you know, probably for the best for my own development. Well, I remember that was when Harry Potter books were still coming out, and I remember wanting to kind of know what, because Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban is my favorite Harry Potter book, hands down, and I just remember wanting to know what the Marauders had been up to during their time at Hogwarts. And that story, none of that backstory had come out yet. because I think we were only up to the 4th book at that point. I don't think Order of the Phoenix had come out yet. So none of that backstory had been published, and I remember wanting it, and because it wasn't there, like, my little, like, 8 or 9-year-old brain went, well, it doesn't exist, so I'm gonna write it. And I remember, like, very clearly, like, sitting, and I'm missing about 80% of my memories from my childhood. Fun fact, my brain just deletes them. It's great. Anyway, so I just have very kind of spotty snapshots here and there, but I remember sitting in my 3rd grade classroom, Mrs. Tudrin's class, and sitting kind of in the back. We had the desk set up in like a U, and I was kind of like this weird like cap desk on the end, like in the back, like next to her desk. For whatever reason, that's where I sat. And I just remember like sitting, I had this blue binder with like loose leaf paper in it, and like writing. Basically, I think I was trying to write like the beginning of the Marauder story. So I think I had started with James Potter as my main character the day he was like leaving to get on the Hogwarts Express to go to Hogwarts for his first year. And I honestly don't think I wrote more than like 4 or 5 pages of that story ever, but that was my, I think, first official attempt at fanfiction. And I remember like thinking a lot about the concept of kind of adding to the story or stuff like that. I don't know, it's hard to explain. But that was, so this was also the time that the Lord of the Rings films were coming out, and I was obsessed with them as a child. As a 26-year-old adult, I'm still obsessed with them. But yeah, Lord of the Rings has been my absolute just kind of favorite thing really in this world since I was a kid, and continues to be, and it's always going to be a huge part of my life. And I just remember, I think the Two Towers had just, this is a couple years removed from this Harry Potter story. We are moving on a little bit. I think I time jumped there in my brain. I didn't communicate that. But I think the Two Towers had just come out at this point. And again, I have just like one just random like vivid memory of being I was at a New Year's Eve party at my friend's house, and all the kids, we were kind of in the basement playing ping pong. And I remember talking to my friends about how I would have written the Battle of Helm's Deep from a different perspective, and kind of like sort of my own character, which I think at the time in my brain was probably a self-insert. I don't know, I don't remember too much about the thought. I just remember the scenario of me explaining it and everybody in that room going, oh, you can't do that, that's not a thing that you can do. And I was like, fuck you, yeah, well, I'm gonna do it now. So I think that was also kind of my first, like, real thought into fanfiction. And then it was a couple of years later that I started to actually discover what, like, I guess, real fanfiction? That doesn't really sound great. But kind of fanfiction as we know fanfiction today, that's when that was really becoming popular. And that's kind of when I discovered fanfiction.net was the first site that I ever read fanfiction on or ever wrote fanfiction for. Because this was well before the days of AO3, which is where I write and read now. But I think that I was definitely reading fanfiction before I was posting it or writing it or posting it. I'm not, that part's a little fuzzy to me in my brain. But I think that it was the summer right before I started 7th grade, so I was about 12, just about to turn 13, I think, when I sat down. And again, this is like a weird, vivid snapshot of, I remember sitting on the couch by the window in my parents' living room, and I had a notebook and a pencil, and I just sat down and I just started writing this Lord of the Rings story that I didn't really know where it was going. I didn't really know what I wanted it to be. I think originally I had wanted it to be this kind of big, epic thing. In my little 12-year-old brain, like that was, you know, that was I think the end goal, but like really it ended up being like a parody that didn't quite realize it was a parody at the time. And that was kind of the first thing that I think ever published on my account. There might have been like a couple of like small one-shotty or like just couple shitty little chapter things that I wrote before that, but that was my first like big story that I remember committing to. Also, I'm not going to talk about my fanfiction.net account because I don't ever wanted to see the light of day again. Fun fact, it actually still does exist, and it's a funny story about why it still exists, is because it is set up, it's hooked up to an email through a service that no longer provides email service. So I can't, and I don't know the password to get into the account, and I can't do the email me to reset my password because the email no longer exists. So you see, it's stuck. It's going to be there forever. And I'm not going to tell you what it is because it needs to stay dead, basically. And I think there's maybe, if I'm unlucky, there's maybe 3 people in this world that might be able to recall what my pen name was. But anyway, that's there. So that story, that original Lord of the Rings story, was I think close to like 50 chapters. Like it was like long. I was well into the Return of the King at that point. So basically my process for that was I would sit down and I would handwrite in a notebook. And I would just do that, and I would, if I didn't like something I had written, I would erase. Oh my god, Oliver, stop. Oliver is now underneath the camera, side note, and I'm really scared he's gonna bump the tripod. So bear with me if that happens. But anyway, I would sit down and I would handwrite in this notebook. And I would just do that for however long it took me to write a chapter. And then I would take my notebook and I would go over to the computer that we had, the one desktop computer we had in the house. And this is kind of the mid 2000s at this point, to just put a timestamp on this. And I would sit and I would type up what I had written, type it into Microsoft Word, and that was kind of the one place I made any edits to it. Which sounds horrible right now to like actually say that out loud. So a lot of the time it honestly just went as was originally written. So the chapters that were posted were the exact first draft and only draft that I had written. And then I would type it up into Microsoft Word, and then you would go onto fanfiction.net. You would go to like, oh, add a new chapter to my story. So it would do all the formatting for you. And then you would post. And that's how I posted fanfiction. And I had quite a few followers, subscribers, readers. I don't know what to call them really. I had quite a few people that were reading and were pretty consistently commenting, and because you couldn't, there wasn't like a kudos system like AO3 has. Oh my god, Oliver, you know you're not supposed to be up here. That's fine. So yeah, there wasn't like a kudos system like AO3 has, it was just you could comment. So I had, oh my god, baby, stop. You know you're not supposed to be on the desk. There. You can sit over here, okay. So yeah, people could really just comment, and most of the comments were pretty good. I remember kind of like right off the bat, I got this like really nasty comment that later I realized, learned it was a bot comment because one of my friends that also wrote fanfiction got the literal like verbatim exact same comment. It was just some troll that was like, you know what, I'm gonna go ruin this kid's day and like shit all over their story for like no good reason. And like, to be fair, like the beginning of that story, it is very obvious that like a 12-year-old is writing it. Like, chill. Chili beans, my dude. And so yeah, it was like people would comment and be like, oh, please write more, please write more. And I like remember that I was churning out, for a while I was just churning out chapters just because people kept pressuring me to write them. And it was, I guess, good motivation for me to write, but it was also really stressful to kind of be on this reader set timeline all the time, and I always felt like if I wasn't posting regularly or there was a really long gap in between chapters, I like literally, like, if you went back to read kind of the author's notes, because there was no note section, you had to put in your own notes at the beginning or end of your story, your chapter, and I would start off every note by apologizing to people, and like that just like didn't, going back kind of as an adult and like reading that, like that didn't make me feel good about, like, or realize, it made me realize that I didn't like feel good about it, obviously, because I just kept apologizing for it. And I don't think at the time I realized like how much kind of like emotional and like mental labor it takes to be a fanfiction writer, because you're not getting paid for it. It is kind of all of your gratification that you're going to get is going to come from your readers, who, also you're generating content because you want to generate content. Very rarely do you make any kind of money off anything, unless you like write stuff for a commission, which a lot of people do, and that's really cool. It's a thing I don't do, or just don't have the time to do. I don't have the time to commit to that, so I know that that's not a thing that I'm doing or feel comfortable doing right now anyway, because I know that I can't keep that time commitment. But good for the people that do that, that's rad. So that's kind of my early days with that, and that story was kind of my first kind of real look into what it takes to be sort of like more of a novelist than opposed to just a short story writer. And I had a couple of other stories that were shorter, were probably 10, 12 chapters long, or a couple of things that were like maybe like 3 chapters, and that was like it. A couple of like little like I think I had like a little like drabbly one-shot challenge I started and never finished, for a completely different fandom. But yeah, that Lord of the Rings, that 50-something chapter story was kind of my first dive into a bigger work. And I remember I worked on this thing basically from when I started writing it, right before I started 7th grade, and I worked on it all through middle school, all through high school, and I think I was probably 17 or 18, I want to say. I didn't look this up beforehand because I honestly haven't looked at that account in about a year. But I want to say about 17 or 18 when I sort of stopped posting on it, just because like school had gotten like in the way of everything, because I was doing school and like 8 billion extracurricular activities, and then I was doing college applications and all that fun stuff. And so like kind of the fanfiction took a backseat to that, because I did have other priorities that I did have to commit to first. And then I remember being a freshman in college, and that was the December that the first Hobbit film came out. And if you know me, you know how obsessed I was with that film. It is still one of my favorite films to this day. I'm not even kidding when I say that I probably went and saw this in theater about 10 or 11 times that winter. I'm gonna let that sink in for a minute. That hurt to say out loud. But basically, like, I fell back into the Tolkien pit hard that winter, and because I was home for about like 3 weeks on winter break, so I really didn't have anything else better to do with my time. So then we, of course, started, because my sister and I would like go like twice a week to the theater to go see this film, and then we were also watching like Lord of the Rings at home, and I remember like pulling up that story, pulling up my fanfiction account, like kind of reading it, and I like went up to my room because I was like, oh, I wonder if I still have the notebooks that I was writing in, because I was still, even at like 17 or 18, was still handwriting in a notebook and then typing it. Like, what? Anyway, again, like mid-2000s to early 2010s, it happened. It's fine. I got through it. But anyway, I remember like going upstairs and finding the notebook and actually finding about 3/4 of a chapter that I had written and just never posted. So there was like more story, and I had zero memory of writing it, and I was like so excited that I like found it. And it was a chapter where they go, and there definitely should have been, like, looking back, there definitely should have been a chapter, because I think the last chapter I posted was a word. Alright, so sorry about that. My camera just like decided it was done recording, so sorry again. But anyway, so I found this chapter, and it was, I think the last posted chapter, they were sitting kind of in the throne room in Minas Tirith talking about how they were going to go on their crackpot march to the Black Gate, and then like the next chapter that I found that I'd never posted jumps to them outside the Black Gate. There definitely should have been a chapter in between. That's fine. That story was based very heavily off of how the movies played out, not the books. So anyway, it was that chapter about the battle at Black Gate, and it was like actually like very like gripping, like how I'd kind of written it. A lot of shit was happening, and I just remember like reading, like finding it and reading it and being like, holy shit. And I had been, for a very long time, been thinking about rewriting that base storyline, but like writing it as like a young adult, like I think I was 19 at that point. So yeah, 7 years had passed between when I had started it and when I had kind of found this last chapter. So yeah, then I started to sit down and kind of rewrite it. And I kind of did that while I was on break, and I remember taking it like back to school with me, and for whatever reason I was saving it. I had a flash drive that I was writing it on. I don't know why I wasn't saving it to my actual computer drive. I think I was just worried because like I have like so many photos that get saved to that computer drive. I think I was worried about space was the reasoning. But so everything was on this flash drive, and I remember one morning, it was like a Saturday or Sunday, it was definitely a weekend morning, I was like sitting in my dorm room, and I was still in bed, and I'd put my laptop, I had like a box under my bed that I was just gonna put my laptop to store it overnight, because like the little like blinky light, if I left it on my desk, it would just like flash in my face all night. And I remember just the box out of nowhere just kind of collapsing, and my laptop fell, and it landed like on its side on the tile floor where the flash drive was still plugged into it, and the flash drive actually bent when it hit the floor and kind of snapped, and I was able to pull it out of the computer luckily, but it was unsalvageable basically. So I lost about a month's worth of work, and it was like close to like 10,000 words, and I just remember just absolutely being crushed. I don't think I did anything the rest of the day because I was just like in mourning essentially for that. And then I did kind of stop writing for a little bit on that story, and that is kind of where that storyline died. Okay, so I don't know how much of that ramble, because I have been talking for a very long time also, I just realized. I don't know how much of that ramble is going to come into this video, but basically what I'm working on right now is 2 stories that I have published, and they are still going. They're up on my AO3 account. I will link my account down below in the description. My pen name is j.r.r, just why I introduce myself as such beginning my videos. And so basically, like last winter, I was working on my piece that is called Picking Up the Pieces, and it's a kind of modern day Hobbit AU with like a bit of a kind of sort of underground crime spin on it, and it's really fun. It's definitely a comedy piece, and it is something that just popped in my head one day, and I like sat down and I wrote out this crazy outline for it, and I remember being so excited, and I wrote about half of the first chapter, and I just like didn't touch it again, like for years. So I think that was actually happening during my freshman year of college, I want to say, because I remember in the outline getting up to Mirkwood and then just being really confused as to what I was gonna do with the Wood Elves, because the second film, The Desolation of Smaug, hadn't been released yet. So I think that I got in between, and those were released, so The Hobbits, 3 Hobbits came out my freshman, sophomore, and junior years of college. So between my freshman and sophomore year sometime was when kind of that outline came to a standstill. And then I didn't, just because like life got in the way, because I was in, college doing like 5 classes a semester and a bunch of kind of extracurriculars, and I was on a lot of e-boards, and I was also, by the time I was a senior, I was working like 40 to 60 hours a week on top of school. So yeah, I did not have time to write. And so it really wasn't until last winter, and that was the first winter that business had been so slow at work that they actually kind of temporarily laid a bunch of managers off just because there wasn't work. So Sean and I now refer to it as our winter sabbaticals that we take. And so I was kind of just home all the time, and I needed something to do, and I remember just like out of the blue being like, you know what, I'll watch Lord of the Rings because it's my favorite films, and I want to make myself feel better today because I was like really down. Because again, seasonal depression smacks like that, kids. And I don't know, just like one day I was like, you know what, I'm gonna finish that story. And by finish, I mean I'm going to pick up from the middle of the first chapter where I stopped writing. I'm gonna keep writing. And so that's kind of that was my whole project last year. and I worked on that for about like 3-4 months on and off, and I had actually planned to try and wrap it up before I got busy at work again, and I was still kind of editing and posting into March, which is when we start to pick up for the new baseball season. And I was still posting, but I wasn't writing any new content for it. And that had been my original goal, was to have everything posted up by opening day. That didn't happen. So my camera keeps cutting out because it's being a piece of shit right now. So I really think it was like April. I think I did post once after the first homestand of the year and then just stopped because I didn't have a lot of time off over the next bunch of months, and when I did have time off, I was really just trying to catch up on the sleep that I missed during whatever last homestand we just had. So that is a goal, definitely a goal to wrap that up. Honestly, I only have about 4 more chapters maybe, that I need to just sit down and just power through, and then it'll be done, and I can actually say that I finished a Tolkien story, because that has been kind of this, like, thorn in my side for, like, basically ever, is that, like, I've never been able to finish a, like, Lord of the Rings or Hobbit fanfiction. And that's actually something I remember writing a piece for one of my non-fiction creative writing classes in college, is how I don't actually finish things. I like starting things, I like doing things, I don't like finishing things. Get to know about yourself, kids. Anyway, so that's gonna be a goal to get done over the next few months, hopefully. And then kind of what I have been, and I'd originally wanted to finish that before I moved on to another story, but I have been working on a Lord of the Rings story for a while. I was kind of working on it a little bit in tandem last winter with picking up the pieces, and it just, like, it's going to be like a very epically long story. I know that because it covers basically, we meet our main character. This story, it's called Wolves at the Door. It's posted, the first, I think, 5 chapters are up on my AO3 page right now if you want to go check it out. But basically we meet Kaelin, our main character, roughly a few days before the Council of Elrond takes place, so we are kind of coming in midpoint from a, I guess, film and book perspective. Midpoint, Fellowship of the Ring is when we pick up. Basically, we come in when the interesting stuff starts to happen with the Fellowship. And it's going to run through the entirety of kind of the quest. But it basically is going to run post-war into the Reconstruction that's happening, into the beginning of the New Age. It's gonna go for a while. So I was really hesitant to, like, post it, just because, like, I'm only 5 chapters in, there is a literal mountain in front of me of what I have to write. But I don't know, I was just, like, feeling, like, in a good spot with it a few weeks ago, and just was like, you know what, fuck it, I'm just gonna put it out there and see if people like it. Definitely didn't get the same kind of reception that Picking Up the Pieces did. That got a lot of really good comments, kind of, like, right off the bat, a good readership base right off the bat. But again, I'm trying to remind myself that they're very different stories. Picking Up the Pieces is a roller coaster comedy, kind of through and through, and Wolves at the Door is very not that. I don't really know what to call it necessarily. It's more of a kind of drama tragedy end of the fantasy spectrum. It has some comedic elements in it because I am a natural born comedian. everything I write is always going to have a tinge of comedy in it because, like, I have this complex where I have to be the funniest person in the room or I will literally die. That being said, it's definitely hard to not write kind of full force comedy all the time on this. But it's been really fun to kind of go back into my sort of English major roots and explore a lot of themes and a lot of kind of character motivations, and it's a lot darker. It's a lot more human. It's kind of funny to say because one of the main characters, our narrator, is not human. She's a wizard. And I guess that brings me to the point that I kind of introduced two new characters to the plot. It is a canon divergence story, which I think turns a bunch of people off already. But you know, whatever. Like, that's the best thing about fanfiction is there's so much of it. Like, read what you want to read, and if you don't like something or it's not up your alley, don't read it. Just go find something else. If you can't find what's out there that you want to read, go write it. And your rant over. But anyway, so there's two new characters that I introduced to the story. One is Ilmare, who is the handmaiden to Varda, who's kind of queen goddess out there, over in Valinor, and she basically gets sent to Middle-earth. Like, Varda's like, yo, the boys are fucking up, like, two of them fucked off to the east, we don't know where they are, like, Radagast is doing God knows what, Saruman's lost his mind, and Gandalf is trying to hold everything together, go help them, please. So Ilmari kind of shows up in Middle-earth with this task from Varda to go kind of aid Gandalf in whatever he needs help with, basically. And then our main character, Kaylin, is, she's a ranger, she's a Dunedain ranger, and we find her in the sort of prologue is where Ilmari talks about how they met, and we find her, post, basically, like, she, had just been attacked by a pack of wargs, and she's dying, and, she's just alone in the forest, and it just happens to be kind of in the vicinity that Ilmari is kind of showing up in Middle-earth, and they end up actually kind of colliding and fusing together. So basically my main character and my narrator are two separate characters, but they have to share a body. So my narration is occurring from inside of another character. By another character. And that makes any sense. It is literally the most complicated narration I ever have to write, and I have to tell myself all the time, like, bro, you did this to yourself. But I think it's gonna be really cool if I can pull it off. I feel like I've been, for the most part, pulling it off. I feel like once, I don't want to spoil anything, but once we get to a certain point, quite a bit later, honestly, it's gonna get easier for me as the author to actually write, because something is gonna happen, and sort of this narration body share is gonna, the dynamic of that is going to change, and it's going to change for the better for me anyway. But yeah, so that's kind of what I've been writing recently, and one of my favorite things to do when I write fanfiction is to kind of have as many allusions to the sort of original works as possible. So I actually have, like, a document, a Google Doc, with all of my chapters from Picking Up the Pieces thrown into one document, and anytime I make a reference to something that happened either in the films or in the book, I put in a little footnote, and at the bottom I'll generate a little footnote, and I'll just write down the reference and, like, what film it's from or what chapter in the book it's from. So like if a character says, you know, the phrase fair enough gets repeated a lot in that story, and which is something that Bilbo says in Bag End when he is first reading over the contract, and so I'll just have kind of like little tidbits like that in there. But Wolves at the Door is definitely taking it to a whole another level because I am pulling from the films, but also pulling very heavily from the books. And, which is, I think you've seen the clip of me, like, I was sitting down with the book in front of me and writing, like, kind of taking notes out of the chapter, that I was writing about at the time. And, this, on top of already the challenging narration, is definitely even harder because I am trying to write it more in the style of Tolkien himself, very book based, and it's written in the past tense, and I do prefer to write in the present tense. That's what Picking the Pieces is written in, but it just didn't make any sense to do that for Wolves of the Door because the first kind of chapter is sort of the prologue, and it's happens at the end of everything. So it's Omari telling the reader, oh, I'm going to tell you a story. So obviously it's her, the entire story is her telling you about what happened. So it had to be done in past tense. So that's already hard for me to do on top of all the crazy narration that's happening. And I am, again, trying to write it kind of more Tolkien-esque. Because it just seemed a lot more fitting for the content of the story, if that makes any sense. But yeah, so this has been a fun ramble, kids. I don't know, I've been talking for a very, very long time. I don't know how much is actually going to make it into this video, because I feel like this video is going to be like 45 minutes long if I leave everything in. With that, I had actually originally intended to get a lot of this filmed yesterday and edit this kind of last night, and then my roommate ended up working from home yesterday because we got a pretty bad snowstorm here in Boston, and she just was like, yeah, not really a fan of going outside, and her office was like, oh, if you can work from home and you don't have to travel, don't travel. And she also, like, she takes the bus to get there, so like the MBTA was just like not really functional yesterday. So she chose to stay home, and I felt like she wouldn't appreciate me sitting in here talking to a camera for like an hour while she was actually trying to do work. So anyway, that's why it's gonna be a few days late. I did put up another video, my cooking with j.r.r video. Go check that out if you want to. So that is my plan today, is to get some stuff done. I have to go do like some laundry and clean the kitchen, and I am kind of hungry. It's like 1:30, so actually I'm gonna eat now. And then I'm probably gonna sit down and try and get some writing done today. So wish me luck. I hope this was helpful. I don't know that it was, because I really just feel like I talked about myself and my stories and not anything that's like useful tips for like how to be a fanfiction writer, but I don't know. Sometimes I feel like just people talking about what they do and not trying to influence you in any way, but just listening to what they do is sometimes helpful for me. Hopefully it was helpful for you. Or interesting. I don't know. We'll find out. So, anyway, thanks for sticking around through this ramble so far, and, yeah. See you later.